Hey guys, tonight we step into the dusty, chaotic streets of ancient Rome, where human lives are bought and sold beneath the relentless Mediterranean sun. Imagine it. You're standing in the middle of a roaring crowd, the scent of sweat, olive oil, and fear mixing in the air. Hundreds of people gather around a raised wooden platform, and on it, human beings stand with placards hanging from their necks, listing their age, origin, and what they can do: cook, teach, fight, or entertain. No one looks at them like people, they're just merchandise. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here without someone trying to appraise you too. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push through the crowd, and the noise gets louder. Shouting, bargaining, laughter, and the soft crying of someone being separated from their family. You're in the Forum slave market, one of several in Rome, where traders auction off their stock. The signs above the stalls are painted with bold red letters, promising strong Gaulish farmhands, beautiful Greek tutors, and trained gladiators. And right now, everyone is talking money. Prices range wildly. A healthy, untrained farm laborer might fetch around 1,000 sesterces, roughly the cost of a decent mule, but a skilled Greek doctor or tutor, easily 50,000 sesterces or more, enough to buy a small villa. Historians still argue whether some luxury slaves really sold for upwards of 200,000, but Roman gossip loved exaggeration, so who knows? The point is, here, a human being's worth depends entirely on what you can make them do. A short, wiry trader yells something about his special stock. He pulls forward a young woman with carefully braided hair, probably from Thrace, knows 3 languages. He shouts, and plays the lyre. The crowd murmurs. Within seconds, a wealthy matron in embroidered silk raises her hand and secures her for a price that could buy 10 oxen. To her, it's not just about utility, it's about status. Owning highly educated slaves was like flaunting a luxury watch today. The rarer the better, and it's not just who you are but where you're from. Roman buyers loved Greek slaves for their education, Celtic slaves for their size and strength, and Egyptians for their exotic looks and perceived mystical knowledge. On the other hand, some groups carried ugly stereotypes. Don't trust Syrians, one Roman buyer mutters nearby, always slippery. This marketplace is built not just on economics but on prejudice. As you watch, a group of captured soldiers from Germania shuffle past, their wrists bound, heads shaved to make them look uniform. They'll fetch less, they don't speak Latin, and no one expects them to do more than break their backs in the fields. A few buyers prod their arms and teeth like you'd inspect a horse. One soldier snarls, and the crowd laughs. In a few hours he'll belong to someone. A strange thing happens here. You start to notice a rhythm. Traders call out numbers, buyers counter, slaves stand silent, and every few minutes, a wooden hammer bangs against a block, sealing another human life into ownership. It feels both chaotic and mechanical, like Rome has perfected the art of turning people into property. And yes, there were labels. Each slave wore a placard describing their skills, and get this: defects, talks too much, tends to run away, prone to illness. Imagine walking around today with your insecurities listed on a signboard over your head. Talk about humiliating. Not every transaction is straightforward. You overhear one negotiation between a balding senator and a wiry Greek merchant. They argue over whether the young man on the platform has been properly trained for household duties. The senator demands a demonstration. Moments later, the slave perfectly folds a toga, serves a cup of watered wine without spilling a drop, and recites a passage from Homer in flawless Greek. The crowd claps politely. The senator smirks and pays triple the asking price. For Rome's elite, prestige was everything. But here's the kicker: despite the crowd and the spectacle, this isn't where most slaves actually come from. Historians estimate that nearly 70% of Rome's slaves arrived through war. Entire cities were emptied after conquests. Their people marched hundreds of miles to be auctioned like this. Picture yourself being dragged from your home, crossing seas and deserts, only to stand on this wooden block while strangers decide what you're worth. Suddenly the heat feels heavier, the air thicker, and yet, even in this grim chaos, you spot something unexpected. A slave trader carefully oiling the shoulders of a young gladiator in training, showing off his muscles to potential buyers. He grins like a car salesman. Perfect stock, he says. Dies slower than most. That's Rome for you. A place where even mortality has a price tag. You lean against a column and watch a small boy, maybe 9 years old, being sold alongside his mother. They're bought together, which is rare. Families were often torn apart without hesitation, and the crowd doesn't blink. But a kindly old merchant nods toward the child and says softly, "Good investment. Raise him right, he'll serve you well." Cold logic maybe, but at least they're not separated. In a world like this that counts as mercy, evening begins to fall and oil lamps flicker around the marketplace, making shadows stretch long across the cobblestones. Traders are still shouting, buyers are still bargaining, and somewhere off to the side, a woman quietly hums a lullaby while clutching a tiny baby in her arms. Her name, her story, her choices, all erased the moment someone handed over a bag of coins. Rome built its empire on marble, roads and aqueducts, yes, but also on millions of invisible hands bought and sold under skies like this one. And as you leave the marketplace, the din behind you fading, you can't shake the feeling that the city itself is whispering a quiet truth. Here, freedom isn't a right, it's a luxury. You step away from the slave market. But Rome doesn't sleep. Even at twilight, the city hums like a restless beast. The sound of sandals slapping against stone streets, the hiss of oil lamps being lit, and somewhere in the distance, a faint echo of laughter and music. You follow it almost without thinking, winding through narrow alleys until the noise grows louder, warmer, and then, you find yourself standing before a carved marble doorway, guarded by 2 servants holding bronze lamps. Inside, soft golden light spills into the street. Someone beckons you in. You hesitate, then step past the threshold, and into another world entirely. Welcome to the Symposium, the Greek-inspired drinking party, beloved by Rome's wealthy elite. But in Athens, this ritual was art, philosophy, and intoxication rolled into one. Tonight though, you're in Athens, not Rome. Somewhere around the 5th century BCE, in a house belonging to a silver-tongued politician, who prides himself on gathering the brightest minds and the finest wines under one roof. You pass through a hallway lined with painted vases and low oil lamps until you reach the andron, the men's dining room. The air is rich with the smell of roasted lamb, honey cakes, and aged wine poured into silver craters. Around the room, cushioned couches are arranged in a horseshoe shape, and reclining on them are Athens' most powerful men, philosophers, poets, politicians and generals. Each one cradles a shallow, delicate cup, called a kylix, swirling diluted wine as if they're stirring ideas into the liquid. A flute girl plays softly in the corner, the melody twining around the laughter and half-whispered debates. The host raises his cup, and everyone falls silent for just a moment. "Tonight," he says, with a grin, "we drink not just to pleasure, but to wisdom." Here's the thing about symposiums. They weren't just parties, they were where ideas were born, alliances forged, and reputations destroyed. One clever comment could elevate you, one drunken mistake could end your career. These men didn't come just to drink, they came to perform. You notice Socrates himself reclining near the center, his eyes half-lidded, looking as if he's bored out of his mind. But you know better, give him time, and he'll dismantle someone's argument with that calm, relentless questioning he's famous for. The wine flows, mixed carefully with water. Drinking it straight was considered barbaric. Servants glide between the couches, refilling cups, offering figs, dates, and slices of cheese. You take a sip yourself. It's smooth, unexpectedly floral, and already warming your chest. The world softens around the edges, and then, the debates begin. A young poet leans forward, declaring that love is the highest form of virtue, a divine madness that elevates the soul. Across from him, a stern general scoffs, insisting that glory in battle is the only path to immortality. The room hums with competing voices, and you can feel ideas clashing like swords. Someone asks Socrates for his opinion. He sits up slowly, scratches his beard, and speaks in that maddeningly calm tone. "Tell me," he begins, "is love something we pursue because it makes us better, or because we cannot bear to be without it?" The room falls silent, eyes dart, brows furrow, and you realize why these symposiums mattered. Here in rooms like this, Athens was inventing philosophy in real time. But symposiums had their darker edges too. Beneath the refined debates and witty banter, alliances were plotted, rivals humiliated, and scandals whispered into attentive ears. That laughing poet in the corner, give him one too many cups of wine, and he might tell you which general has been siphoning military funds. A careless joke could ruin you. Every word spoken here has weight, Hours pass though time feels strange in this warm lamplit room. The music grows livelier, the debates looser. Someone suggests a kottabos contest, a drinking game where guests flick the dregs of wine from their cups, trying to hit a target across the room. The sound of laughter and playful shouting fills the air, the seriousness dissolving into drunken camaraderie. Outside, the city sleeps beneath a canopy of stars, but in here, minds are awake, alive, colliding in sparks of inspiration. You realize that some of the ideas exchanged tonight, about justice, beauty, love and power, will ripple outward for centuries, shaping worlds these men will never see. Eventually, the wine jars empty. One by one, the couches are abandoned, sandals slip back onto dusty feet, and the guests stumble out into the cool Athenian night, still murmuring fragments of debates and jokes. The last notes of the flute fade, and the house grows quiet again. You linger for a moment, feeling like you've witnessed something intimate and timeless, a single night in Athens, yet somehow eternal. But before you leave, remember this: the symposium wasn't just about drinking, it was about transformation. Men entered these rooms with questions, and sometimes they left with answers, but more often they left with better questions. The streets of Rome are still damp with morning mist when you first hear it. A deep, steady rumble, like distant thunder. You follow the sound weaving through narrow alleys until the stone walls fall away, and suddenly, there it is, the Colosseum. Even now, standing before it, your breath catches. It towers above the Forum like a mountain carved by gods. 4 colossal tiers of arches stacked one atop another, wrapped in sunlight. Inside, 50,000 souls are gathering, their voices merging into a single restless heartbeat. You step closer, pulled by the roar, and the smell hits first. Iron, sweat and roasted meat from street vendors peddling spiced sausages to excited crowds. Merchants shout prices, gamblers argue over odds, and pickpockets move like shadows among the throng. For most Romans, today isn't just another day, it's a holiday of blood. A trumpeter sounds the call, sharp and commanding. The gates open, and you're swept into the tide, climbing steep marble stairs polished smooth by decades of sandals. Inside, the amphitheater feels alive, humming with energy. Slaves hand out cups of cheap wine as spectators settle onto stone benches, sorted meticulously by rank. Senators recline in shaded boxes, draped in fine togas, their rings glittering in the sun. All wealthy merchants sit just below, hoping to be seen. Higher up, the commoners pack shoulder to shoulder, loud and unrestrained, while at the very top, the summum menianum, slaves and women squeeze together, the lowest of the low, but still grateful to witness history. Down below, the arena stretches wide and golden beneath a thin layer of sand designed to soak up blood. Massive wooden trapdoors hide cages beneath, where wild beasts snarl in darkness. Lions shipped from Numidia, elephants from Carthage, crocodiles dragged from the Nile itself. Somewhere beneath your feet, something roars, and a ripple of anticipation rolls through the crowd. Then, silence. A single figure steps into the imperial box, his purple cloak snapping in the breeze. The emperor himself. The crowd erupts, chanting his name, fists pounding the air. For Rome, the games are more than entertainment. They're proof of power, wealth and divine favor. The gladiators enter next, their armor flashing under the sun. Some wear heavy helmets and broad shields, the secretors. Others fight nearly bare, wielding nets and tridents. The retiari, mocked by some, admired by others. Each pair represents not just skill but contrast, speed versus strength, cunning versus brutality. You watch one kneel before the emperor, touching his sword to the sand in salute. The crowd leans forward, as horns blare, and the gates crash open, and then chaos explodes. A blur of steel and flesh, of cheers and screams. Dust rises in choking clouds as 2 men circle each other, blades clashing like struck bells. A spear finds its mark, slicing skin, and the crowd surges to its feet, shouting for blood. There's a rhythm to it, you realize. A terrible dance. Strike, block, feint, lunge. Some gladiators fight with calculated precision, every move rehearsed, every breath measured. Others fight like men possessed, burning their lives in minutes just to taste victory. Historians still argue whether most fights ended in death. Some believe the vast majority of matches were carefully staged, with kills reserved for spectacle. Others claim the arena consumed lives daily, a relentless machine fed by Rome's conquests. Either way, when the loser falls and raises a trembling hand, All eyes turn to the emperor. Thumbs up, thumbs down. One gesture decides everything, and yet, behind the glory, there's tragedy. Most gladiators are slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to fight, but not all. Some are volunteers, free men chasing fame, riches or redemption. To them, the Colosseum is both curse and opportunity. Imagine it, winning enough battles to earn a wooden sword, the rudis, granting freedom and celebrity status. A rare prize, but one worth dying for. Suddenly, a horn sounds again, louder this time, deeper. The crowd hushes. Heavy gates swing open, and the ground trembles as 6 massive elephants charge into the arena, their tusks painted crimson, their handlers shouting commands. Behind them, a dozen chariots roll out, wheels rattling over sand. This isn't just a fight anymore, it's a war. The air fills with dust and screams, the sound of snapping wood and shattering bone. A lion leaps from a hidden trapdoor, claws flashing, and the crowd gasps as it drags a fallen gladiator into the shadows. For a moment, you forget to breathe, and then, just as suddenly, it's over. The survivors stand panting in the center, drenched in sweat and blood, their bodies trembling but unbroken. The emperor rises, raises his hand, and the crowd roars approval. Trumpets flare, as attendants rush in, dragging away bodies, scattering fresh sand to cover the stains. By tomorrow, the arena will be spotless again, ready for another day of triumph and terror. Walking out, your ears still ringing, you glance back one last time. From the outside, the Colosseum gleams in the sun, serene and eternal, as if it hasn't just devoured lives. Inside though, the ghosts linger, of men who fought, of crowds who cheered, and of an empire convinced that spectacle could last forever. The air in the Punic lands was heavy with heat and dust, but what terrified Roman soldiers most wasn't the burning sun. It was the sound, a deep, earth-shaking rumble that rolled across the battlefield like thunder trapped in the ground. Men clutched their spears tighter, knuckles pale beneath their shields, scanning the horizon. And then, through the shimmering waves of heat, they appeared, Carthaginian war elephants. Towering beasts, taller than 2 men stacked atop each other, tusks capped in bronze, their hides smeared with ash and red ochre, to make them look like demons from another world. Atop each beast sat a maholt, a skilled driver wielding a hooked spear, and behind him, archers or javelin throwers ready to rain death upon the enemy. For centuries, elephants had been symbols of power, wealth, and divine favor across Africa and India. But in the hands of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general Rome came to fear most, they became something far more, instruments of terror. Imagine standing in the ranks of a Roman legion, staring across a field as 37 of these monsters charge straight at you, each one weighing as much as 6 chariots combined. The ground shakes beneath your feet, shields tremble in your grasp, horses scream in panic and bolt from formation. The first time Rome faced war elephants, during the First Punic War, they had no idea how to fight them. Arrows and javelins barely pierced their hides, spears broke like twigs against their muscled legs, and when the beasts finally smashed into the Roman lines, chaos erupted. Soldiers were trampled underfoot, formations shattered, and entire legions fled. But Hannibal's genius wasn't just in brute force, it was in psychology. When he led his army, and his elephants, across the Alps in 218 BCE, Rome believed it impossible. Snow, ice and narrow passes should have killed them all. Instead, Hannibal arrived in northern Italy, like a storm descending from the mountains, his elephants leading the charge as living symbols of Carthage's defiance. Roman historians wrote of soldiers freezing in terror as they saw the beasts silhouetted against the white peaks, steam rising from their bodies, their tusks glinting in pale winter light. To the Romans, it was as if Carthage had summoned creatures from another realm. But elephants were never invincible. Hannibal's campaign pushed them beyond their limits. Many died crossing the Alps, their massive bodies ill-suited to snow and ice. To those who survived, however, played a decisive role in battles like Trebia and Lake Trasimene, where their charges shattered Roman cavalry and sent thousands fleeing. By the time of Cannae, the battle historians still call Rome's greatest defeat. Hannibal used every trick he knew. The elephants didn't just crush soldiers, they crushed morale. Imagine looking up at a wall of grey flesh and ivory, hearing the guttural trumpets echoing across the field, knowing that one misstep could see you flattened beneath a creature older than empire itself. But Rome learned, over decades of bloody lessons, they developed tactics to neutralize the beasts. Legionaries were trained to open lanes in their formations, letting elephants thunder harmlessly through while volleys of pila, Heavy Roman javelins targeted their eyes and underbellies. War horns blared, designed to startle and disorient them. At times they even used fire, setting pigs ablaze and driving them screaming toward the oncoming elephants, panicking the animals into trampling their own men. By the Second Punic War's end, Rome had transformed fear into strategy. Hannibal's last surviving elephants fell in battle or were captured, paraded through Rome as trophies before being slaughtered, a symbolic declaration that Carthage's might was broken. And yet, the elephant's legend endured. Even centuries later, whispers of them haunted Roman soldiers facing distant Eastern armies. Their sheer size, their strange intelligence, and their unstoppable momentum became etched into memory as living engines of war. Close your eyes and picture it. Dawn breaking over an ancient battlefield, the mist lifting to reveal a silent army stretching across the plain. Then somewhere beyond the fog, a low rumble begins. The sound deepens, becomes thunder beneath your feet, and just as you brace for impact, the beasts emerge, eyes wild, tusks gleaming, their towering forms blotting out the rising sun. For a moment you understand why men feared them, because in those days before gunpowder, before steel artillery, the war elephant was more than a weapon. It was nature weaponized. Even Rome, master of continents, had to bend, adapt, and evolve in the shadow of creatures it could not tame. And perhaps that's the truest lesson the elephants left behind, that even empires as mighty as Rome were once humbled, not by gods or kings but by beasts who carried the weight of history on their backs. In the quiet hush of a medieval dawn, when mist clung low to the rolling hills and roosters cried across distant fields, life in a small European village began the same way it had for generations, with the smell of bread baking. For peasants, lords, monks and kings alike, bread was more than food. It was existence itself. Every class ate it, but what lay on your wooden table said everything about who you were in the great hierarchy of medieval life. For the poor, rye bread was common, dark, coarse, and heavy, made from grains mixed with whatever could be spared, sometimes even crushed peas or acorns during hard years. It filled the belly but rarely pleased the tongue. It wasn't just food, it was survival disguised as a meal. For the wealthy, however, there was manchet, soft, pale white loaves baked from finely sifted wheat flour, so delicate they almost melted on the tongue. Eating white bread was a visible marker of status, like wearing silk or owning land. Lords dined on luxury while peasants chewed bitterness. But bread was never eaten alone. Alongside it, day after day, cup after cup, there was always ale. In an age where clean water was unreliable and often dangerous, ale wasn't just a drink, it was life's safeguard. Even children drank it, though their cups were filled with a weaker brew called small ale, gently fermented to prevent sickness. For adults, stronger ales warmed the bones during endless winters and offered a brief escape from toil and hunger. In towns and villages, brewing was a communal art, passed from mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor. Kitchens smelled of malt and damp grain, where cauldrons simmered and yeast transformed water into sustenance. Every batch was different, every mug a reflection of someone's skill and care. And in monasteries, brewing rose to perfection. Behind thick stone walls, where chants echoed through cold cloisters, monks experimented endlessly, refining recipes, balancing sweetness with bitterness, and blessing each barrel as though sanctifying a gift from God himself. For travelers seeking shelter, the monastery ale was often the finest they'd ever taste. But food and drink weren't just nourishment in the Middle Ages. They were ritual, belief and power. When famine struck, and it often did, the absence of bread became a shared terror. Grain stores emptied, fields turned barren. Hungry villagers crowded churchyards, praying for rain while famine bred disease and despair. During such times, bread itself seemed divine, a symbol of hope, a reminder that life hung by the thinnest of threads. Ale too became central to community life. Taverns buzzed with gossip, trade and secret bargains whispered by firelight. There, under smoky rafters, peasants might share benches with passing soldiers, merchants or minstrels spinning tales. Every village had its stories, and almost all of them began over mugs of ale and loaves of bread. Bread also shaped faith. In cathedrals towering above crowded streets, priests lifted wafers of pure white bread during Mass, declaring them the body of Christ. For peasants who might never taste such refined loaves in daily life, this sacred bread connected them to something far beyond their fields and firesides. It was more than a meal, it was a promise. And yet beneath these rituals, hunger was a constant shadow. A poor harvest could topple entire economies, leading to riots and revolts. In 1315, rains drowned crops across Europe, sparking the Great Famine. People stripped bark from trees, boiled grass into soups, and ground whatever seeds they could find into bitter loaves. Bread was no longer a symbol of class or comfort, it became the thin line between life and death. Imagine sitting by a crackling fire in a small timber cottage, your family huddled close as winds batter the shutters. Outside, snow blankets the fields where grain once stood tall. You break a rough, stale loaf into pieces, passing it to your children. A clay mug of ale rests by your side, warm in your hands. In that moment, bread and ale are not luxuries, they are survival itself. Over time, though, bread became a marker of change. As trade routes opened and cities flourished, new grains arrived. Wheat, once rare and precious, became more widely available. By the late Middle Ages, bread began to shift from necessity to culture, from bare survival to craftsmanship. Bakers experimented with shapes, spices, and even honey-glazed crusts for special feasts. Ale, too, evolved. Stronger, richer brews emerged, flavored with herbs and eventually hops. The humble kitchen cauldron gave way to larger breweries supplying towns and markets. Taverns grew louder, their rafters echoing with song and laughter late into the night. And yet, through every change, one thing remained constant. Bread and ale were the heartbeat of medieval life. They sustained peasants in their fields, monks in their cloisters, and kings in their castles. They shaped economies, faith, and tradition. Close your eyes now, and listen. Hear the crackle of the oven fires, the soft hum of prayers in stone chapels, the laughter spilling from taverns under moonlit skies. Smell the malt, the yeast, the warm crust breaking beneath your fingertips. In every sense, bread and ale were memory made edible, binding communities together, generation after generation. And perhaps, in the quiet of night, as we drift toward dreams, we can understand something those villagers once knew, that sometimes, the simplest things, a loaf of bread, a shared cup of ale, hold the greatest power, not because they feed the body, but because they keep the spirit alive. The marketplace fades behind you now, its chaos dissolving into memory as we step deeper into the quiet streets of Rome. Ahead, a grand domus, a wealthy Roman townhouse, rises beneath the setting sun. Marble columns gleam faintly gold, and behind carved wooden doors lies a world where slaves became shadows, yet also, somehow, the silent pulse of the household. Inside, the air smells faintly of olive oil and burning incense. Terracotta lamps flicker along the walls, their trembling light dancing on mosaics beneath your feet. The sounds are soft here, whispers of servants, the faint scrape of a stylus on wax, the distant splash of water in the atrium fountain. A Roman household was an empire within an empire. At its center, the paterfamilias, the father, held absolute authority over everyone beneath his roof. His word wasn't law, it was fate. His wife, children, clients and slaves, all lived under his shadow. Yet, it was the slaves who formed the unseen machinery that kept Roman life alive. Picture one now, a young Greek tutor, standing in the dim light of the peristyle garden, reading softly from Homer to the master's sons. His price had been high, nearly 30,000 sesterces, because knowledge was power in Rome. But to him, the walls feel like a gilded prison. His homeland is far behind him, and though he shapes young Roman minds, his own dreams are forever silenced. In the bustling kitchen, the heat from the clay hearth presses heavy on the skin. A cook stirs a pot of spiced garum sauce, that pungent Roman delicacy, while a kitchen slave carefully plucks figs for dessert. The mistress expects guests tonight. Everything must be perfect. A single mistake could mean punishment, and punishment here is swift and public. Yet, life inside wasn't always cruelty. For some, the domus became their entire world. Certain trusted slaves, especially those born in the household, were treated like distant family. Some were freed after years of loyal service, becoming freedmen who could finally own property, marry, and carve a small place in society. Others were given secret responsibilities, handling finances, managing estates, or even advising their masters. Imagine one such man now, Marcus, the household steward. He walks silently through the atrium, keys jangling softly from his belt. He knows every secret the walls hold, every whispered affair, every hidden debt, every dangerous political scheme discussed over wine. He cannot speak of them, yet his silence makes him powerful. But this quiet life could also shift without warning. A single order from the master, and everything changed. Some slaves were sold off without farewell, families torn apart overnight. Others were sent to brutal labor farms, where survival was a matter of strength and luck. And yet, listen carefully. Beneath this weight of power and control, there were moments of rebellion, quiet, invisible, but real, a missing amphora of wine, a hidden stash of coins buried beneath the mosaic tiles, a whispered promise among kitchen slaves, one day, we'll leave. These are not the stories written in Roman marble, these are the shadows between the stones, the human heartbeats beneath the grandeur. Outside, the city hums, the streets are alive with cartwheels creaking, the calls of street vendors selling figs and honey, the laughter of children chasing each other past marble fountains. Rome is immense, chaotic, eternal, yet, within these private walls, life contracts into tiny dramas, a spilled jug, a stern glance, a silent longing, and as the oil lamps burn low, the household falls into a restless silence. The paterfamilias sleeps in his bedchamber, the mistress lies awake, worrying about dowries and debts, the tutor dreams of the blue Aegean Sea he'll never see again, and in the servants' quarters, cramped and airless, a dozen tired bodies curl into uneasy sleep, knowing that at dawn, the machinery of Rome will demand their hands once more, because here in this empire, freedom is fragile, and time belongs to those who can afford to buy it. The sun climbs high over Rome, and you feel the heat pressing against your skin, as you follow the crowds flowing like a river down marble steps. Ahead, rising from the heart of the city, stands the Colosseum, the largest amphitheater the ancient world would ever know. Its white stone walls gleam under the blazing light, arches stretching endlessly, banners snapping in the warm breeze. Today, 50,000 Romans have gathered here to forget their debts, their quarrels, their hunger, and to lose themselves in blood and spectacle. For them, the price of a ticket is nothing, but for the ones performing inside, the cost is everything. You step through the shadowed archways into the arena, and the world explodes around you. Trumpets blare, the roar of the crowd rises like a living beast. Sand glitters under the sun, stained in places where yesterday's battles spilled too much life. And there, at the heart of it all, stand the slaves. Some are trained gladiators, bought for sums that would make your head spin, 2,000 maybe 5,000 denarii for the most promising fighters. Others cost almost nothing. Prisoners of war dragged from distant provinces, criminals sent here instead of the mines, and debtors too poor to repay what they owe. For the Roman elite, these men and women are property first, people second, yet once they step onto this sand, everything shifts. In this arena, a slave can become a legend. Picture one now, a tall Thracian man, muscles coiled like rope, standing beneath the shadow of the emperor's box. His name, or rather the name they gave him, is Orion. He was bought for less than the price of a chariot horse, yet today, thousands chant his name. His weapon is a curved blade. His opponent, another slave, wears heavy armor and carries a trident. As the gates slam shut, Orion breathes deeply. The trumpets fall silent. The only sound is the rasp of his breath, the heartbeat in his ears, and then, chaos. Steel clashes, sand sprays, the crowd roars. It's violent, yes, but strangely choreographed. Gladiators are taught to prolong the fight, to make death beautiful, to turn survival into theater. The emperor watches closely, deciding fates with the tilt of his thumb. Not all fights end in death. That's the part Hollywood rarely tells you. In truth, most gladiators didn't die in every match. They were investments after all. A seasoned fighter could earn his master small fortunes in prize money, and some even became rich enough to buy their own freedom. But freedom was rare. For every Orion who lived to fight another day, there were dozens who didn't, and the sand beneath your feet remembers them all. Gladiators weren't the only ones here though. Slaves played every role imaginable to keep this spectacle alive. Some worked as beast handlers, training lions, tigers, and leopards brought from Africa. Others staged mock naval battles, flooding the arena with water until ships floated across it. And some, heartbreakingly, were sent into the arena unarmed. Condemned criminals dressed as mythical figures, slaughtered for the crowd's amusement. Imagine that now, standing beneath the blinding sun, dressed as Hercules or Apollo, handed a wooden sword while a real lion waits across the sand. The crowd cheers, but your heartbeat drowns everything out. For them, it's entertainment. For you, it's the end. Historians still argue whether these games were designed only for public pleasure, or as a brutal political weapon. Some believe emperors used them to distract the masses, to drown discontent beneath waves of spectacle. Bread and circuses, they called it. Feed the people, entertain them, and they won't rise against you. Others think it was more primal than that. A collective exorcism, a way for Romans to confront mortality by watching others fall. Whatever the truth, the cost was real. Thousands of slaves, bought, sold and discarded, kept this empire's entertainment machine running. But here's the strange twist. Some gladiators chose this life. Not slaves, not condemned criminals, free men, and even noble Romans signed contracts to fight in the arena. The fame, the roar of the crowd, the promise of gold, it seduced them. For a moment, under the Roman sun, they became gods. Imagine Orion again, after his victory. He kneels, breathless, as the emperor raises his hand. The crowd erupts. His life is spared. Later, in the torchlit tunnels beneath the arena, a healer tends his wounds. Other fighters slap his shoulder in quiet respect. For one night, he's untouchable. Tomorrow, it begins again. When you step out of the Colosseum's shadow, the air feels heavier. Behind you, thousands celebrate. Ahead, the narrow streets wind toward the slave markets again. You can't help but wonder how many of those sold there today will end up in that arena tomorrow. The Colosseum may be grand, but it's built on fragile things, blood, sand and silence. And as night falls, torches flicker against its towering walls like fireflies caught in stone. You feel a strange weight settle over you. Rome hides its darkest truths in plain sight. And here, under the cheering of thousands, freedom and death dance closer than you'd like to believe. Rome called itself eternal, its laws unshakable, its power absolute. For centuries, it believed one truth above all else. Slaves do not rise. But then came a man who changed everything. The spark, it begins quietly, in a gladiator school near Capua. Picture a long stone courtyard, where slaves train beneath the brutal sun, practicing strikes and parries until their bodies ache and bleed. These are not free men. They are investments, owned and drilled like cattle for the arena. Among them is a Thracian named Spartacus. No one remembers when exactly he stopped dreaming of freedom, but perhaps he never truly stopped. Unlike most, Spartacus had once fought with the Roman army before being enslaved. He understood their tactics, their weaknesses, and perhaps most importantly, he understood hope. One night, in whispers carried through torchlit corridors, Spartacus and 70 fellow gladiators make a desperate plan. They would break free, even if it meant dying in the attempt. Their weapons, whatever they could find, kitchen knives, wooden practice swords, scraps of iron. When the moment comes, their rebellion erupts like a storm. They overpower their guards, escape into the dark countryside, and vanish into the hills. For Rome, this should have been nothing more than a small disturbance, a few escaped slaves to be hunted down and killed. But Spartacus is no ordinary runaway. The fire spreads within weeks, hundreds join them. Farmhands, miners, house slaves, field workers, people with nothing left to lose. By spring, that number swells to tens of thousands. Entire Roman villas are abandoned, and rumors ripple through the city like lightning. At night, by the light of a dying campfire, imagine Spartacus standing before his ragged army. His clothes are torn, his blade dull, yet his voice carries with quiet strength. We were not born slaves, and we will not die slaves. They call themselves an army now, but they are something stranger, wilder, a living dream of freedom. Rome sends soldiers to crush them. Small legions at first, underestimating what they face. Spartacus outsmarts them all. He uses guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and terrain mastery, fighting not like a Roman, but like a hunted man who has nothing left but desperation. Again and again, the so-called slave army wins. For the first time in centuries, Rome fears its own shadow, the price of hope, but freedom is heavy. As their numbers swell to over 70,000 souls, food runs scarce, winter bites hard in the Apennine Mountains. Families travel alongside warriors, children cling to their mothers while soldiers sharpen rusted blades. Some dream of returning home, crossing the Alps and leaving Rome behind forever. Others want vengeance, to see the empire burn for what it has done. Spartacus, he dreams of both, but knows he can have neither. One night, as snow falls softly on the camp, he sits alone, staring into the flames. Around him, laughter and song drift faintly, a fragile sound, a reminder of what they're fighting for. Yet his eyes stay distant. He knows how Rome works. The longer they fight, the harsher the retaliation will be. Still, he cannot stop, not now, not when thousands look to him as the first taste of something bigger than survival. The fall Rome finally takes the threat seriously. They send Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in the empire, backed by 8 full legions. This is no longer a skirmish. It's war. The slave army fights fiercely, But supplies dwindle, betrayals spread like sickness, and slowly, inevitably, Rome closes in. The final battle takes place near the Silurus River. The ground trembles beneath marching soldiers, shields gleam like liquid fire under the sun. Spartacus rallies his warriors one last time. Witness him now, standing tall, his blade raised high, his voice hoarse but unbroken. Today, we are not slaves. Today, we fight as free men. The charge begins. Arrows darken the sky, steel clashes, screams echo across the field. Spartacus cuts his way through wave after wave of legionnaires, desperate to reach Crassus himself, to end it, to strike at the heart of Rome. But there are too many. When Spartacus falls, it is not with surrender, but with his sword still in hand. The aftermath. Rome shows no mercy. 6,000 captured rebels are crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies left to rot under the sun, a warning to anyone who dares dream of freedom again. The empire breathes easy once more, and yet, something has shifted. Spartacus may have lost, but his rebellion haunts Rome. For generations, his name becomes a whisper, then a symbol, then a legend. He fought not for power, not for wealth, but for the simplest thing denied to him, the right to live free. Even now, as you lie beneath the quiet of the night, listening to the crackle of an imagined fire, you can almost hear it. The echo of his defiance carried across centuries. We were not born slaves, and we will not die slaves. For centuries, slavery was the beating heart of Rome. It built the roads, filled the markets, farmed the fields, and manned the households. Without slaves, the empire seemed unthinkable. But as all empires do, Rome began to change, not in a single moment, but in quiet, relentless waves. Shadows of change. Imagine the 2nd century CEE. Rome is at its height, yet something subtle stirs beneath the grandeur. In villas scattered across the Italian countryside, slave populations begin to dwindle. Farms that once relied on hundreds of enslaved laborers now struggle to replace them. Why? Because war, the lifeblood of Rome's slave supply, had slowed. Once, every campaign brought back thousands of captives, bound in chains and sold at auction. But as Rome's borders hardened, conquests became rarer. With fewer prisoners of war, the slave markets ran thin. Suddenly the empire had to think differently. The laws begin to shift in the reign of Emperor Hadrian. Whispers of reform begin. For the first time, Rome passes laws restricting extreme cruelty against slaves. No longer can masters kill them without facing consequences. It's not mercy exactly, it's practicality. A dwindling resource must be preserved. A century later, Antoninus Pius goes further. If a master murders a slave, the state may intervene. Such protections were unthinkable in Spartacus's time. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, slaves are seen less as property and more as people, not equals, but no longer disposable. This shift ripples through Roman society. Some wealthy citizens begin freedmen programs, granting loyal slaves their liberty after years of service. Freedmen often remain tied to their former masters as clients, but they carry a new dignity, a name, a status, a chance to rise. The rise of colony. Yet as slavery declines, Rome finds a replacement, the colony system. Picture vast rural estates in Gaul, Hispania, and North Africa. Instead of enslaved workers, landowners now rely on poor free men, tenant farmers who rent small plots in exchange for a portion of their harvest. At first, this feels like progress. Coloni are technically free, but freedom on parchment is not always freedom in life. Trapped by debts and taxes, many coloni find themselves bound to the land, generation after generation. Rome had traded one chain for another. Faith and freedom, and then comes Christianity. In the first few centuries, CEE, it spreads quietly, almost invisibly, among Rome's poor and enslaved. Its teachings whisper a radical idea. Before God there is neither slave nor free. For a society built on hierarchies, this is revolutionary. While the church doesn't abolish slavery outright, it changes the moral landscape. Masters are urged to treat their slaves with kindness. Freeing a slave becomes an act of piety, a way to cleanse the soul. Over generations these beliefs soften attitudes. By the 4th and 5th centuries, as the empire edges closer to collapse, slavery still exists, but the old brutal systems are fading. The cracks in the empire. By now Rome is no longer the invincible machine it once was. Economic pressures mount, barbarian invasions strain the frontiers, and in the chaos, the once vast slave trade dries up entirely. In cities, Workshops once buzzing with enslaved craftsmen now fall silent. Wealthy families who once owned hundreds of house slaves now manage with a handful. Across the empire, labor shifts towards small self-sufficient communities, the fragile beginnings of medieval serfdom. Ironically, as Rome's power fades, so does its dependence on slaves. The quiet end, unlike Spartacus's fiery rebellion, the end of Roman slavery is not marked by battle or bloodshed. It doesn't vanish overnight. Instead, it dissolves like mist, replaced by new systems, new faiths, and new economies. By the 6th century, under the Eastern Roman Empire, large-scale slavery is all but gone, not because Rome suddenly grew kind, but because history moved forward, reshaping chains into subtler forms, blurring the lines between freedom and servitude. And yet, in the hush of this moment, something profound lingers. The same empire that once crucified thousands along the Appian Way now leaves behind a quieter legacy, one where the memory of Spartacus, the laws of Hadrian, and the whispers of early Christian faith outlive the empire itself. Empires rise, and empires fall, chains break, and new ones are forged. But the longing for freedom, that never dies. Close your eyes. Imagine standing at the edge of the Roman Forum, long after the empire has fallen. The marble columns, once bright and alive with voices, now lie cracked and quiet beneath the moon. The roads that once trembled beneath marching legions are empty, carrying only the whispers of the past. Somewhere beneath your feet, the dust of forgotten lives sleeps. Soldiers, senators, poets, and slaves. A world built on backs. Rome rose higher than any city before it, but its foundation was laid on millions of unseen hands. From the grand amphitheaters to the golden mosaics, from the paved roads to the flowing aqueducts, every stone tells the silent story of those who labored, those who suffered, and those who dreamed of freedom. For centuries, Rome believed itself eternal. Its senators debated, its generals conquered, its markets thrived, and yet, beneath the splendor, there was always the soft shuffle of bare feet, the slaves who made it all possible. The unheard voices. Listen closely. Can you hear them? The marketplace chatter, the ring of hammers in the forges, the crack of whips in distant fields. Voices carried through time, names erased, stories untold. We know the prices they fetched at auction. We know the numbers counted in ledgers, but we will never know their laughter, their private hopes, the way their hands trembled as they dreamt of something more. And yet, if you stand very still, it almost feels as though their longing hangs in the air, waiting to be remembered. Freedom, always. Empires fall, chains rust, time swallows monuments and names alike, but there is something greater than Rome itself, that survives, the longing to be free. It whispered through the fields of Sicily during Spartacus's rebellion. It burned quietly in the hearts of colony bound to the land. It moved through the sermons of early Christians, carried on soft voices in candlelit rooms. Before God, there is neither slave nor free. Across centuries, this longing shaped laws, faiths and dreams, until at last, the vast machinery of Roman slavery dissolved into memory. The quiet lessons tonight. As the firelight softens and shadows stretch across ancient stones, we are left with quiet lessons from history. That power built on suffering cannot last forever. That chains, though strong, are never eternal. That even in the darkest times, human dignity persists like an ember, small, fragile, but impossible to extinguish. The Rome that once seemed unbreakable is gone, but the hope carried in the hearts of the forgotten lives on. Into the silence now. Picture the Roman Forum again. Silent, moonlit, timeless. The wind stirs through the ruins, carrying the faint echo of marching boots and distant voices, fading slowly into nothing. In that silence, there's a strange kind of peace. For all its power, Rome became only another story. Its triumphs and tragedies, victories and losses, chains and freedoms, all folded gently into the pages of time. And as you listen, as your breath slows, you can almost feel the weight of history lifting, like the last ember dying in the hearth. Sleep now, for even the mightiest empires rest, and tomorrow when you wake, the sun will rise on new stories yet to be written. Soft fade to gentle fireplace crackles and distant night ambience. 4 minutes of silence before the audio ends. Yahan Pa Humara, entire bedtime storytelling journey, complete hotter high, poorer flow, calming, immersive, or sleep-friendly high. You wake up to the smell of damp stone and burnt olive oil. It's still dark, but there's no real night in this part of Rome, just a dim twilight that leaks through narrow windows. You roll off the thin straw mat, rubbing your wrists where yesterday's rope marks are still raw, and you remind yourself today, maybe, the overseer will be in a better mood. Your body aches from yesterday's work, but there's no time to think about that. Already, you hear footsteps outside, soft, measured, but quick. That's Garius, another slave in the household, and from the sound of his breath, he's late. Again. You should warn him, but you don't. You can't risk drawing attention to yourself today. As you step into the courtyard, the smell of baking bread mixes with the faint tang of wet limestone. Somewhere nearby, pigeons argue over scraps, and the first rays of sunlight crawl slowly over the rooftops. Your mistress sits beneath the pergola, reclined on cushions, idly twisting a ring around her finger. She doesn't look at you, but she doesn't need to. A flick of her hand sends you toward the fountain to fill the amphora before breakfast. And as you bend to lift the heavy clay jar, something strange happens. For a moment, your mind drifts, and you picture the people walking freely in the streets outside. Merchants bargaining, senators gossiping, children laughing, their sandals clicking softly against the stone roads. You imagine what it would feel like to walk among them, as one of them, not carrying anything, not hurrying anywhere. But the daydream vanishes with a single sharp voice. Faster. Historians still argue about just how harsh the lives of domestic slaves were in Roman households. Some writings describe moments of surprising kindness, letters from wealthy patrons boasting about educating their most talented slaves, even freeing them in old age. Others, though, paint a darker picture, records of punishments, chains, and an absolute lack of control. And yet, within these walls, power is absolute. One raised eyebrow from your mistress decides whether you'll eat well today, or go hungry, whether you'll have a blanket at night, or just the cold. But here's the strange, almost uncomfortable truth. If you serve in a rich household, your life, hard as it feels, might still be better than those in the fields, the mines, or the galleys. Because somewhere, far from this villa, other slaves wake to iron collars, their necks branded with numbers, their feet shackled as they descend into pitch-black tunnels. Some will never see daylight again. By midday, your tasks are endless but familiar, grinding grain, sweeping mosaic floors, keeping the oil lamps trimmed. You pause sometimes just to breathe, feeling the coarse linen of your tunic sticking to your back with sweat. Garius whispers when no one's around, his voice low and fast. Did you hear? A boy down at the market was sold for only 2 silver denarii yesterday. You blink. That's less than a pair of sandals. It doesn't make sense, but it's true. Prices for slaves in Rome vary wildly. A healthy, trained Greek tutor, that could cost hundreds of denarii, maybe even more than a small farm. But a child from a conquered village, one too young to work yet, might sell for almost nothing, like an afterthought in the grand machine of empire. And yet, the irony. Sometimes, that cheap boy grows up to become a household steward, earning trust and eventually freedom, while the expensive Greek dies young of fever. Rome loves order, but life has its own plans. By evening, shadows lengthen across the marble courtyard. You kneel by the fountain, scrubbing amphorae, when you overhear 2 freedmen talking nearby. Freedmen, ex-slaves, now citizens, though never quite equals. One laughs bitterly. They still call me Libertus, he says, as if my chains are invisible. It hits you then, even freedom isn't simple. You glance up at the stars just beginning to appear, and you wonder, will you ever see your own name carved into a citizen's record, or will your life dissolve into silence, like so many others before you? Somewhere deep down though, a stubborn ember refuses to go out. Maybe, just maybe, there's a way. Night falls slowly over Rome. The city quiets, though never fully. There's always the faint hum of voices, the distant call of a night hawker selling honeyed wine. Inside the villa, the air cools, but you're still restless, lying on your mat beneath the faded mural of a goddess, whose name you've forgotten. You listen to the soft creak of the roof beams, the occasional drip of water into a cracked basin, and your thoughts wander. What would it feel like to own your own time? To wake because you wanted to, not because someone commanded it. To decide where your feet would take you. Some say freedom is priceless. Others could tell you the exact figure Rome sets for it. And as sleep pulls at your eyelids, you think of that boy at the market, sold for 2 denarii, and you whisper to yourself, just once, a promise, not forever. Close your eyes. Imagine stepping into ancient Athens on a warm summer night, when the marble streets are washed in moonlight, and the cicadas hum softly in the olive trees. Somewhere, behind high wooden doors, carved with twisting ivy patterns, laughter spills into the quiet night. It's a private house. the home of a wealthy citizen, perhaps a politician or philosopher. Tonight, he hosts a symposium, one of Athens' famous drinking parties. But the word party doesn't quite fit. This is something else, something deeper. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of wine warmed by clay bowls and burning incense drifting lazily from bronze dishes. Oil lamps cast soft shadows across the room, making the frescoes on the walls almost come alive. Reclining couches are arranged in a perfect circle around a low table piled with figs, honey cakes, and roasted chickpeas. Here, men lounge in silk robes, leaning on one elbow, their sandals discarded. Their voices weave together like music, rising and falling with every toast, every debate, every burst of laughter. And in the middle of the room, something unexpected happens. Philosophy is born. The symposium is not just about wine, it's about ideas. One man recites a fragment of Homer, his voice rich and deep, making the story of Achilles feel as alive as if it had just happened yesterday. Another challenges him with a question. If honor drives men to war, does honor also destroy them? Heads turn. Someone laughs softly, someone else frowns, and suddenly, the quiet room fills with heated discussion. Words fly, about love, politics, beauty, justice, and the soul. And somewhere in the corner, Socrates himself may have once reclined, his unshaven face catching the lamplight, his bare feet crossed casually. He listens more than he speaks, but when he does, everything stops. The unexamined life, he says slowly, is not worth living. No one breathes for a moment. Then someone claps him on the shoulder, refills his cup, and the conversation drifts elsewhere, like smoke rising toward the rafters. But make no mistake, wine still flows freely. The crater, a huge mixing bowl, sits at the center of the room, filled with wine carefully diluted with water, never too strong, never too weak. Balance, like all things in Athens, is an art form. A slender young boy moves quietly between the couches, refilling cups, his bare feet soundless on the marble floor. Somewhere, a flute girl plays a soft lilting melody, her music curling around the voices like a secret. You feel the air shifting, the slow warmth of intoxication mingling with the fire of brilliant minds. And yet, beneath the laughter, there's a kind of weight in the air, because outside these walls, Athens stands at a crossroads. War with Sparta looms like a distant storm. Alliances are fragile, power is shifting, and the men in this room, the poets, the philosophers, the strategists, know that everything they discuss tonight may shape the city's future. For them, the symposium isn't just pleasure, it's practice for immortality. Later in the night, the music grows louder, and the debates give way to games and riddles. One man challenges another to a contest, who can craft the most beautiful toast in a single breath. Another insists on telling a myth no one has heard before, spinning a tale of gods and mortals so vivid that even the servants pause to listen. At the edge of the room, a small clay lamp flickers, its flame bending with every passing draft. The smell of resinous pine drifts in, mixing with crushed grapes and honey. It's in these moments, somewhere between reason and revelry, that Athens feels most alive. But like all nights, even this one must end. By the time the last cithara string is plucked, the moon has traveled far across the sky. The philosophers recline a little heavier on their couches now, their voices slower, softer. One by one, they rise and slip their sandals back on, wrapping their cloaks tight around their shoulders, before stepping into the cool dawn air. For a moment, the quiet after their departure is almost startling. Only the servants remain, clearing the empty cups, gathering the discarded wreaths of ivy, and dousing the lamps one by one. And as the last glow fades, the questions linger, about love, about honor, about what it truly means to live. Centuries later, fragments of these conversations survive in scraps of parchment and weathered stone. Historians pore over them, trying to understand not just what they believed, but how they dreamed. Because in a way, every symposium was a kind of time capsule. Within its walls, Athens captured the purest essence of being human, the joy of food, the warmth of company, the intoxication of ideas, and the restless longing to understand the world. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear their laughter again, rising faintly through the ruins, carried by the night breeze. And somewhere, deep in that eternal echo, Socrates still whispers, wisdom begins in wonder. Close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Now imagine standing at the edge of a vast sun-scorched battlefield in the 3rd century BCE. The air is thick with dust and heat, and somewhere far in the distance, a deep rhythmic pounding rises from the earth. At first, you might mistake it for thunder, but then the ground trembles beneath your feet, and you realize, they are coming. The war elephants of Carthage. Under the blazing Mediterranean sun, their silhouettes grow larger against the horizon, towering beasts draped in crimson cloth, their tusks capped in polished bronze that glints like fire. Their dark eyes seem almost human, filled with a kind of terrible wisdom, as though they understand the weight of the battle they march toward. At their side walk Carthaginian soldiers, their round shields catching the light, their spears lifted like a field of silver reeds swaying in the wind. And behind them, banners ripple with the black sigil of Carthage, snapping sharply with each hot gust of air. Among them, rides their brilliant, relentless commander, Hannibal Barca. Picture him for a moment. His face is worn from years of campaigning, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Born in Carthage, a city of endless harbors, merchant wealth and fierce pride, Hannibal carries something deeper than strategy in his heart. He carries vengeance. Rome had humiliated Carthage in the First Punic War, stripping it of power and dignity, and Hannibal swore, as a young boy, standing beside his father at a temple altar, that he would one day destroy Rome. That vow burns in him now, like a coal that never cools, and today, his secret weapon moves steadily forward. Dozens of African elephants, trained for years to face the roar of battle without fear. If you were standing on the Roman side, you'd hear them before you'd see them. A low rumble, growing louder with every heartbeat. Then the trumpeting, sharp, piercing cries that cut through the noise of marching men. The earth shakes beneath thousands of feet. Elephants, soldiers, cavalry, all moving as one. To the Romans it must have looked like something out of a nightmare. These animals weren't just bigger than horses, they were living towers of muscle and bone, their sheer size enough to scatter infantry lines before the first spear was thrown. Imagine it, standing with your shield raised, sweat dripping into your eyes, when out of the swirling dust comes a beast 3 times taller than you, its tusks gleaming, its trunk curling like a serpent poised to strike. Your courage falters before the first blow even lands. But Hannibal wasn't reckless. He knew the elephants were more than weapons, they were psychological storms. He trained them carefully, teaching them to respond to horn blasts and rider commands, to ignore the deafening chaos of battle, to push through fear. Some were armored, their hides draped in leather and bronze, while others carried small platforms on their backs, where archers could rain down arrows from above. In the Second Punic War, Hannibal led his army and his elephants across the Pyrenees, the Rhone River, and the unthinkable, the towering ice-bound Alps. Picture that for a moment. The narrow frozen passes, the bitter wind cutting like knives, men slipping on ice-slick rocks, pulling ropes until their hands bled, trying to coax these massive beasts forward when the ground beneath them crumbled into sheer cliffs. Many elephants didn't survive the crossing. Snowstorms swallowed them, ice claimed their footing, supplies dwindled, and yet, Hannibal pressed on. By the time his forces descended into the green valleys of northern Italy, the Romans expected him to be broken, weakened, incapable of mounting a threat. But what they saw instead left them breathless. Hannibal emerged from the Alps, battered but unbowed, leading his surviving elephants at the front of his army, like living symbols of defiance. At the Battle of Trebia, in 218 BCE, those towering creatures charged into Roman lines, shattering formations, scattering cavalry, and sending fear racing through seasoned veterans. The Romans had never faced anything like them. Even when Roman soldiers thrust spears deep into their sides, the elephants kept pushing forward, their trumpets echoing across the fields. Their weight alone crushed men beneath them. The earth became chaos, screams, shouts, breaking shields, and the deep rhythmic pounding of beasts that refused to fall. And yet, there was tragedy too. For all their strength, elephants were vulnerable. Roman generals quickly learned to exploit this, sending fire-tipped javelins and blaring horns to drive them into panic. In some battles, elephants turned on their own lines, trampling friend and foe alike. Hannibal understood this terrible risk, but he never abandoned them. To him, they were more than weapons. They were companions, allies, symbols of his dream. Historians believe Hannibal may have even had one beloved elephant, a great beast named Surus, who carried him after he lost the sight in one eye during the long campaigns. Surus, they say, stood out among the others, perhaps the last of the great Indian elephants Carthage had once acquired, towering above his African kin, draped in crimson cloth and gold fittings. It's said that when Hannibal surveyed the battlefield, it was often from Surus's back, high above the dust, smoke and death below. But no war lasts forever. Despite his victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and even the crushing triumph at Cannae, Hannibal's campaign eventually faltered. Carthage could not match Rome's endless reserves of men, wealth and sheer determination. The elephants that once inspired terror dwindled, one by one, until few remained. By the time Hannibal was finally defeated at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, Carthage's war elephants, and Hannibal's dream, were all but gone, and yet, their echoes remain. Stand today on the quiet fields where they once charged, and if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The distant rumble of the earth, the sharp blast of a war horn, the trumpeting cry of an elephant as it barrels through the dust, unbroken, unstoppable, unforgettable. Because Hannibal's elephants were never just beasts of war, they were hope, they were defiance, they were the living heartbeat of a man who refused to surrender, even when the world told him he must. And in that way, they live on, in memory, in history, and in the endless story of human ambition. Close your eyes, let your mind drift back. It's the early morning of a cool spring day in a small medieval village, somewhere deep in the English countryside. The sun hasn't yet risen above the rolling green hills, and a soft mist clings to the ground, curling around wooden cottages and cobbled paths. Far away, a single church bell tolls, slow and deep, calling villagers to wake. And in the silence that follows, there's a different sound, the steady, rhythmic thump of kneading dough. Inside a humble, smoke-darkened cottage, a woman leans over a heavy wooden table dusted with flour. Her hands work quickly, folding, pressing, turning, shaping rough brown dough into loaves. This isn't just food. For her, and for almost everyone in her world, bread is life. In medieval Europe, bread wasn't a luxury, it was the center of existence. Rich or poor, noble or peasant, your day, and your survival, depended on it. But the bread you ate told the world who you were. For the wealthy, life meant soft, pale loaves made from finely sifted wheat, manchet bread, as it was called, white and delicate, reserved for noble tables. These loaves were baked in private ovens by skilled servants, sometimes flavored with honey, herbs, or even imported spices for those who could afford such extravagance. But for the peasants, the story was very different. Their bread was darker, coarser, heavier, made from whatever grains were available: rye, barley, oats, sometimes even beans or chestnuts mixed into the dough. It was often dense and sour, baked in communal ovens shared by the entire village. Some loaves were so hard they could last for weeks, but they'd tear at your teeth like stone. And yet, even this rough bread was precious. Without it, a family might not survive the winter. Now picture a narrow street outside the cottage, lined with thatched roof houses and wooden carts. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, damp earth, and ale. In medieval villages, ale wasn't just a drink, it was a necessity. Water from rivers and wells was often unsafe, carrying sickness and disease. But ale, brewed from boiled water and fermented grains, was safe to drink. Even children consumed it daily. Almost every household brewed its own ale in small batches. Inside smoky kitchens, copper kettles simmered over open flames, filling the air with the warm scent of malted barley. All brewers, often women, called alewives, stirred the mash with long wooden paddles, whispering quiet prayers that the yeast would take hold and the brew wouldn't spoil. Imagine stepping into one of these kitchens now. The air is thick and warm, the firelight flickering against rough plaster walls. Clay jugs and wooden mugs line a crooked shelf, and a freshly brewed batch of ale rests in a cool corner, frothy and amber. This wasn't strong beer like we know today. It was small ale, light, mildly alcoholic, meant to quench thirst and provide energy. Workers drank it before heading to the fields, craftsmen sipped it while mending tools, and children took it with their bread at every meal. In the absence of clean water, ale kept people alive. But medieval food was never far from ritual and faith. Every Sunday, villagers would gather in the local church, a cold stone building filled with candlelight and whispers. There, bread transformed into something sacred. During the Eucharist, the priest would break a white, unleavened wafer, symbolizing the body of Christ. For a poor peasant who lived on dark rye bread and thin ale, this ritual carried deep meaning. To taste white bread, even a fragment, was to taste heaven itself. It reminded them that food wasn't just survival, it was a bridge between earth and eternity. Now listen closely. Outside the church, life unfolds slowly, hour by hour, tied to the rhythm of bread and ale. At dawn the baker lights his oven, and the first villagers arrive with rough bundles of dough under their arms, waiting their turn to use the heat. By mid-morning, the scent of fresh loaves drifts down the streets, mingling with the smoke of hearth fires and the damp breath of the fields. By noon, men sit beneath leaning wooden fences, eating chunks of brown bread with wedges of salted cheese, washing it down with a mug of ale. Children chase one another nearby, their laughter bright against the quiet hum of bees, and as evening falls, families gather around rough-hewn tables, bread is passed by hand, ale is poured into chipped mugs, and simple meals are shared in soft candlelight. In a world without electricity, without glass windows, without clocks ticking on the walls, time was measured in loaves baked, mugs emptied, and seasons passed, but life was fragile. A bad harvest could turn everything upside down. When wheat failed, loaves grew smaller, ale grew weaker, and hunger crept like a shadow through the village. People boiled acorns, ground nettle roots, mixed bark into bread just to survive. In those hard years, bread wasn't just food, it was hope, and when hope ran thin, prayers became the second nourishment. And yet, despite hardship, there was beauty. On festival days, villages came alive with music and laughter. Bakers shaped loaves into intricate patterns, spirals, braids, even little birds, and ale flowed freely from barrels set beneath oak trees. Bonfires blazed, bells rang. For a night, the ordinary transformed into something extraordinary, and even the poorest peasant might taste white manchate, bread sweetened with honey, washed down with golden ale, brewed strong and sweet for the occasion. Those rare moments reminded them, and us, that joy has always been simplest when shared. Close your eyes again. Can you smell the warm crust of bread fresh from the oven? Can you taste the faint bitterness of ale on your tongue? Can you hear the quiet crackle of firelight, and the low hum of voices gathered around a wooden table? This was life for millions of people for hundreds of years, a life where bread sustained the body, ale safeguarded the health, and together they wove the rhythm of existence itself. Even now, if you wander through the cobbled streets of certain English villages, you'll still find old stone bakeries standing where medieval ones once stood, their ovens blackened by centuries of fire, and if you listen closely, you might still hear it. The sound of dough being kneaded, the low chatter of an alewife tending her kettle, the tolling of a distant church bell as the day begins anew. Bread and ale, simple, ordinary, and yet, they were the quiet heartbeat of an entire world. Imagine a Europe that's alive and bustling. It's the mid-14th century. Markets overflow with laughter and chatter. The scent of fresh bread drifts through narrow cobbled streets. Children chase one another between wooden carts. Blacksmiths hammer sparks into the air, and churches echo with bells calling people to prayer. Life feels eternal, steady, unshaken. No one knows that something unseen is already on its way. Far to the east, in the dry steppes beyond the Caspian Sea, a tiny invisible killer begins its journey. Carried by fleas, clinging to the backs of black rats, the plague rides silently along the bustling trade routes that connect Europe to Asia, the Silk Road. It hides in ships filled with silk and spices, creeping beneath the wooden planks, unseen among sacks of grain. And then, one spring morning in 1347, a fleet of merchant ships docks at the port of Messina, Sicily. When the townsfolk approach, they find a nightmare. Sailors lie dead or dying on the decks, their bodies covered in black, swollen lumps, buboes, and their eyes fever-bright with terror. Within days, the sickness spreads through Messina, like fire through dry grass, and from there, it begins its relentless march across Europe. They called it the Great Mortality. Later, we would call it the Black Death. Imagine waking one morning in a small medieval village. You step outside to greet your neighbor, but he doesn't answer. His cottage door hangs open, his bed empty, except for a body still and pale. By nightfall, 2 more families are gone. The disease moved faster than anyone could comprehend. Fever, chills, agonizing pain, swollen black buboes beneath the arms and groin, internal bleeding that left dark stains beneath the skin. Most died within 3 days. By winter, whole towns fell silent. Bells tolled endlessly. Candles burned in church windows, their light flickering against the shadows of empty streets. In some cities, 1 out of every 2 people was gone. Gravediggers couldn't keep up. Bodies lay stacked in alleys and fields. Mass pits swallowed hundreds at a time. Priests, overwhelmed and terrified, abandoned their parishes. Families locked themselves indoors, praying the sickness would pass them by. But the plague was merciless. It touched kings and peasants alike. Merchants, monks, farmers, children, all were equal beneath its shadow. And yet, amid the terror, humanity showed its fragile beauty. There were those who stayed to nurse the sick, risking their lives to comfort strangers. In small chapels, soft hymns rose as priests prayed for salvation. Mothers whispered lullabies to fevered children, their voices trembling but steady. In Florence, chroniclers wrote of the silence, how once bustling streets now echoed with the sound of weeping and the clatter of empty carts. In London, a cold mist hung low over the Thames, as the city watched its population fall to half in just a few months. Europe itself seemed to hold its breath. By the time the plague loosened its grip in the early 1350s, the numbers were staggering: 75 to 200 million dead across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Entire villages erased from maps, families reduced to names carved on weathered stones. But the Black Death didn't just take lives, it changed everything. For the survivors, nothing was the same. With so many gone, labor became scarce, fields lay untended, workshops stood empty, and suddenly, peasants, once bound tightly to their lords, discovered a new bargaining power. They demanded better wages, fairer treatment, freedom to move where work called. This shift cracked the foundations of the feudal system that had ruled Europe for centuries. Slowly, a new class of independent farmers and skilled workers began to rise. The plague also left deep marks on faith. Some clung to the church more tightly than ever, seeking answers and forgiveness. Others turned away, angry and lost, questioning how a loving God could allow such devastation. Movements of reform quietly stirred, whispers that centuries later would shape the course of Europe's spiritual life. And then, there was the art. Before the Black Death, medieval paintings often showed serene saints and heavenly visions. But after the plague, Europe's art changed. Skeletons danced in church frescoes, grim reapers walked among kings and peasants alike. Writers spoke openly of death, of fragility, of how fleeting life truly is. It was as if the collective heart of Europe had been shattered, and its artists were painting the pieces back together. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine walking through a small medieval cemetery today, the grass soft beneath your feet. The stones are worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind. Beneath them rest lives that ended too soon. Children, mothers, farmers, soldiers. The wind rustles the trees. Somewhere, a bell tolls faintly in the distance, as if echoing through time. It's a reminder of what they endured, and what they left behind. The Black Death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. Out of its darkness came new systems, new ideas, new art, and a changed understanding of life itself. It forced Europe to reinvent itself, socially, economically, spiritually. And yet, perhaps the deepest change was quiet, unspoken. For those who survived, each sunrise became more precious. Each loaf of bread, each mug of ale, each shared laugh around a wooden table, more sacred than ever before. Sometimes, it takes the shadow of death to remind us how fiercely we want to live. Even now, nearly 700 years later, echoes of the Black Death remain. Scientists study its traces in old bones, writers retell its stories, and somewhere in the cobbled streets of ancient cities, if you pause long enough, you might still hear it. The hush of a world forever changed by an enemy it couldn't see. The bells, the prayers, the silence, the reminder of just how fragile we truly are. Close your eyes. The year is 1190. A soft fog curls around the edges of a stone castle. Torches flicker against the dark sky. Beyond the high walls you hear the muffled thunder of hooves. Knights returning from training, their chainmail glinting in the pale moonlight. The air smells of damp earth, smoke, and steel. Inside the great hall, banners sway gently, embroidered with lions, crosses, and family crests. At the center, a long oak table stretches beneath candlelight, where a young squire kneels before his lord. Tonight, he will become a knight. Knighthood wasn't just a title, it was a promise. In medieval Europe, to become a knight meant more than learning to wield a sword. It meant dedicating your life to a strict code, one that bound your heart, your honor, and your very soul. From the age of 7, boys born to noble families left home to serve as pages in the castle of a lord. They learned to read and write, to tend horses, to serve at the table, and most importantly, to observe. At 14, they became squires. Now, they trained directly under a knight's watchful eye, learning to ride war horses, sharpen blades, and master the lance. But they also learned respect, how to speak with humility, to serve faithfully, and to protect those weaker than themselves. And then, if they proved themselves worthy, came the ceremony of knighthood. Picture it. In the great hall, the squire kneels on one knee before his lord. Candles cast long shadows across the stone floor. The hall is silent, except for the rustle of silk and the soft whisper of prayers. The lord touches a sword to each shoulder and speaks the ancient words. In the name of God, Saint Michael, and Saint George, I dub thee knight. Be brave, be loyal, be true. And in that moment, the boy becomes something more, a protector, a servant of honor, a living embodiment of chivalry. But what was chivalry? It was more than courage in battle. It was a moral code, a way of living, loyalty to your lord and your king, defense of the weak and helpless, courtesy toward women, and respect for their honor. Faith, to uphold the teachings of God. Humility, to serve without arrogance, even in glory. Knights were taught to fight fiercely, yes, but also to forgive, to act with compassion, when victory made cruelty easy. In a world where war and chaos were constant companions, chivalry was a fragile attempt to civilize violence, to bring light into darkness. Now imagine yourself standing on a battlefield. The year is 1214, dawn is breaking over rolling green hills, armor gleams beneath the rising sun. You hear the creak of leather, the snort of war horses, the distant calls of men preparing for war, and yet, among this chaos, there is order. Knights ride beneath banners of gold and crimson, carrying shields marked with family crests. They form tight lines, disciplined and silent, waiting for the signal. When the horns sound, they lower their lances and charge, a wall of steel thundering across the earth. The clash is deafening, swords meeting shields, arrows slicing through the air, but amid the violence, there is honor. A knight sees a wounded enemy, and shields him from further harm. Another rides through chaos to pull a fallen comrade from danger, because even in war, the code remains. Knighthood, however, was not only about battle. Knights were also symbols of their time. In castles they hosted feasts, recited poetry, and sang songs of devotion. Troubadours carried tales of their courage from village to village, inspiring awe and reverence among the people. And then there were the tournaments. Crowds gathered as knights donned shining armor, and competed in jousts, charging at one another with lances in displays of skill and power. To win was to gain glory, but also the admiration of nobles and ladies alike. Still, true knighthood meant more than fame. It meant protecting the voiceless, the peasants, the orphans, the widows. For every battle fought in the name of kings, there were countless quiet moments where a knight stood guard at a village gate, ensuring no harm came to those within. But as centuries passed, the world began to change. By the late 15th century, powerful armies wielding longbows and cannons made heavily armored knights less effective in open war. Kingdoms grew larger, wars became bloodier, and the romantic ideal of knighthood started to fade. And yet, the spirit of knighthood endured. The code of chivalry, honor, loyalty, compassion, outlived the men who first swore it. It shaped laws, inspired literature, and left behind legends that still echo through time. Even today, when we speak of someone acting chivalrous, we summon the shadow of those long-ago knights, their banners snapping in the wind, their vows etched into memory. Close your eyes for a moment. Hear the soft clink of chainmail, the distant thunder of hooves, the whisper of a sword drawn from its scabbard. Picture a knight kneeling beneath a vast starlit sky, his hands clasped in prayer before battle. He knows the world is brutal, unpredictable, but he chooses honor anyway. He chooses compassion when hatred would be easier. He chooses courage, even when fear consumes him. That, more than the armor, the titles, the glory, was the true heart of knighthood, and perhaps, in some quiet way, it still lives on in us. Every time we choose kindness over cruelty, loyalty over betrayal, and courage over fear. The knights are gone, their castles now crumbling into moss and stone, but the echoes remain, in legends, in lullabies, in the quiet stories whispered by firelight. The code of chivalry still rides beside us, even when we no longer see the banners waving in the wind. A pale mist drifts across the rice fields of Edo. Bamboo forests whisper in the cool night wind. Somewhere in the distance, a shakuhachi flute sighs a lonely melody, soft and haunting, and beneath the shadow of a red rising sun, walks a samurai. His armor is lacquered black, his twin swords, the katana, and the wakizashi, gleam softly at his side. His face is calm, unreadable, but inside, his heart beats like a distant drum, because for a samurai, every step could be his last. The samurai were not ordinary soldiers. For nearly 700 years, they ruled the battlefields and the courts of feudal Japan. They were warriors, yes, but also poets, philosophers, and servants of a strict moral code called Bushido, the way of the warrior. Bushido was more than rules. It was a way of life, loyalty to one's master, even unto death, courage, both in battle and in facing inevitable fate, honor, above wealth, above power, above life itself, compassion toward the weak, self-discipline, the mastery of one's body, mind, and spirit. The samurai believed life was fragile, like a cherry blossom falling from a branch. Beauty lived in its impermanence. Death was never feared, only dishonor. Picture a young boy, barely 12 years old. He kneels in the tatami-matted hall of his family's home, head bowed as his father, a seasoned samurai, places a wooden practice sword into his hands. Remember, the father whispers, your sword is not your power, your mind is. From that day forward, the boy trains endlessly. At dawn, he learns the art of the bow. At noon, he practices the swift, precise draw of the katana. At dusk, he kneels before scrolls of poetry, calligraphy, and philosophy, because to be a samurai was to master both war and peace. Now, imagine standing in the middle of a battlefield. The year is 1575. The Takeda and Oda clans face one another beneath a grey, rain-soaked sky. Drums thunder, banners snap wildly in the wind. The samurai stand in perfect silence, their armor glinting beneath the falling rain. At the signal, they move. A wave of steel crashes forward. Arrows slice the air like whispers. The clash of swords is deafening, but through the chaos, the samurai fight with grace, every strike precise, every movement measured. For them, this is not madness, it is art. But battle was only one part of their world. When not at war, samurai served as stewards, judges, and teachers. They advised their lords, protected villages, and ensured justice. Many devoted themselves to poetry, ink painting, and tea ceremonies, finding harmony in simplicity, balance, and beauty. Because discipline wasn't just for the battlefield, it shaped every breath, every gesture, every choice. Yet beneath this calm exterior lay a darker reality. Samurai lived under constant pressure. A single mistake could mean death, not always at the hands of an enemy, but by their own. The practice of seppuku, ritual suicide, was seen as a way to preserve honor when all else was lost. Imagine kneeling before a quiet garden, cicadas humming in the trees. A samurai, defeated in battle, sets aside his helmet. He writes a final poem, a death verse, capturing the fleeting beauty of life in a few delicate strokes of ink. And then, with unshakable resolve, he fulfills his duty. To us, it may seem unthinkable, but to the samurai, there was no greater shame than living without honor. And yet, despite this severity, there was a profound gentleness in their world. They believed in balance, yin and yang, strength paired with compassion, skill paired with humility. Even the sword itself, the katana, was treated as something almost sacred, forged over weeks in blazing fires, folded thousands of times to achieve impossible sharpness. Each blade was a reflection of the warrior's own soul. Before every battle, many samurai would kneel and bow deeply to their weapon, not as a tool of death, but as a reminder of responsibility. But as time passed, the world began to change. By the 17th century, Japan entered the Tokugawa shogunate, an era of relative peace. Without constant war, the role of the samurai shifted. Many became administrators, scholars, and keepers of tradition. The sword was drawn less often, but the spirit of Bushido remained. Even when firearms arrived, when Western ships touched Japanese shores, the soul of the samurai endured, quiet, disciplined, unbroken. Today, centuries later, their echoes still linger. In a bamboo grove outside Kyoto, you can still hear the wind whispering through the leaves, like distant voices carried across time. You can still find the old scrolls, their ink faded but their words eternal. The way of the warrior is found in death. It's not about seeking death, but about living with such purpose and honor that death holds no power over you. Close your eyes for a moment. Hear the soft rustle of silk robes, the hiss of a blade sliding from its scabbard, the haunting notes of a distant flute. Imagine standing beneath 1,000 falling cherry blossoms, their petals swirling in the breeze. That is the spirit of the samurai, a reminder that strength without discipline is chaos, that power without compassion is hollow, and that true honor is not earned in victory, but in how we live, and how we choose to die. The battles are long over, the shoguns have fallen, the swords now rest behind glass in quiet museums, but Bushido, the way of the warrior, lives on. Every time we act with integrity, Every time we face fear with courage, every time we choose loyalty over betrayal, we carry a small piece of that ancient code within us, and in that way, the samurai never truly disappeared. The year is 1347. A cold wind blows through the narrow, cobbled streets of a small English village. Wooden shutters rattle in the night as whispers travel from door to door. The sickness is here. The Black Death has arrived. Inside a dimly lit cottage, a mother kneels beside her feverish son. His breathing is shallow, his skin blotched with dark, swollen lumps. Candles flicker weakly. The smell of herbs and sickness hangs heavy in the air. She prays softly, but outside, the church bells toll endlessly. Each chime marks another life lost. Back then, medicine was primitive. Doctors were few, and those who existed often relied on superstition more than science. The human body was a mystery, and disease was feared like a curse. The prevailing belief came from an ancient theory called the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. People thought health depended on keeping these humours balanced, fall sick, and it meant one was out of balance. The cures: bloodletting, cutting open a vein to release bad blood; cupping, heated glass cups placed on the skin to draw out illness; leeches, hundreds of them, clinging and sucking, thought to purify the body. Imagine lying weak with fever, while a physician in a long black robe calmly opens your arm and watches a bowl fill with your blood. And then came the plague. When the Black Death swept through Europe, it killed nearly half the population. No one knew why. No one understood how. Fear consumed the continent. People turned to strange remedies, carrying posies of herbs to ward off bad air, burning incense and sweet-smelling woods, rubbing crushed emeralds on swollen buboes, drinking mixtures of ground-up snakes, arsenic, or even powdered toad bones. Some believed the disease was a punishment from God, and formed groups called the Flagellants. They marched barefoot from town to town, whipping themselves bloody in the streets to atone for humanity's sins. Picture that for a moment, a procession of pale, gaunt men under a grey, weeping sky, chanting softly as whips crack against their backs, their robes soaked red, and still, the plague devoured everything. Hospitals, as we know them, barely existed. In the Middle Ages, a hospital was often a monastery, dim, damp stone halls where monks tended to the sick with prayers and poultices. Beds were stuffed with straw, air smelled of sweat, herbs, and death. Surgical instruments existed, but anesthesia did not. Imagine lying on a rough wooden table, held down by 3 men, while a barber surgeon, yes, the same person who cut hair and shaved beards, prepares to saw off a limb. The only way to numb the pain: a mug of strong ale, and a rag to bite down on. Yet, for all their crude methods, medieval healers tried. Some remedies were surprisingly effective. Willow bark tea eased fevers. We now know it contains salicylic acid, the basis of aspirin. Honey was used to dress wounds, naturally antibacterial. Herbal poultices of thyme, rosemary and garlic often helped prevent infection. But without understanding germs or hygiene, success was rare. Doctors wore plague masks with long curved beaks stuffed with aromatic herbs, believing they filtered out bad air. To us, they look terrifying: black leather coats, glass-eyed masks, towering over the dying. But back then, they were a symbol of hope, even if hope was fleeting. One of the strangest practices was trepanation, drilling a hole into the skull to release evil spirits. Picture a dim stone chamber, torchlight flickering against damp walls. A patient lies still, head bound tightly, while a crude hand-crank drill whines against bone. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, only faith and desperation. And yet, some patients survived. Childbirth too was dangerous. Women gave birth at home, often attended by midwives with little formal training. Complications were common, and infection was deadly. Many women wrote birth prayers, and clutched them tightly as labor pains tore through their bodies, hoping to survive what was often called the Valley of the Shadow of Death. Despite everything, medieval people had an unshakable belief in the sacred balance of life and death. When remedies failed, they turned to charms, saints and relics: a scrap of cloth said to belong to a holy man, a sip of water blessed by a priest, whispered prayers beneath cathedral arches. Science was centuries away, but faith was their medicine. By the 15th century, change began to stir. Scholars in Italy, France and England started dissecting human bodies in secret, sketching what they found with painstaking detail. The Renaissance was dawning, and with it, the earliest sparks of modern medicine. But for most ordinary people, the world remained fragile, uncertain, and full of shadows. Close your eyes. Imagine the creak of a wooden cart, carrying the dead through a silent village, the rustle of herbs in the hands of a trembling healer, the distant toll of bells under a dark, weeping sky. This was medieval medicine, a world where science and superstition intertwined, where hope clung to every prayer, every charm, every whispered cure, a reminder of how far we've come, and how fragile life once was. Close your eyes. Imagine standing on the edge of a vast, endless desert. The wind carries grains of golden sand across the horizon, whispering secrets older than memory itself. Beneath your feet, beneath these shifting dunes, lie entire worlds. Cities once full of life, laughter, and dreams, now buried in silence for thousands of years. These are the lost cities, forgotten by history, but never erased. 1. Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands. The first legend begins deep in the heart of the Arabian desert. For centuries, Bedouin tribes told stories of a glittering city called Ubar. They said its towers pierced the sky, its markets overflowed with riches, and its people thrived on the lucrative frankincense trade. But Ubar's pride was its undoing. Ancient texts whispered that its people grew arrogant, defying divine warnings. One night, a great sandstorm descended, swallowing the city whole. By morning, Ubar had vanished, erased from the map as though it never existed. For generations, explorers searched. None succeeded, until NASA satellites spotted strange patterns beneath the Rub al-Khali desert, the empty quarter. Archaeologists uncovered collapsed limestone caverns and ancient walls, confirming Ubar was real. Stand there in your mind. Feel the heat of the sun on your skin, the dry wind in your lungs, and know that beneath the dunes once an empire glittered. 2. Mohenjo-Daro, the ghost city by the Indus. Travel with me now to the dusty plains of modern-day Pakistan. Here lie the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the world's earliest great cities, built nearly 4,500 years ago. Imagine walking through its wide streets, perfectly planned, straight as arrows. Stone houses stood 2 stories high, underground sewers carried waste away, public baths shimmered beneath the sun. And yet, one day, without warning, the city fell silent. No signs of war, no evidence of famine. The people simply vanished. Archaeologists uncovered skeletons lying face down in the streets, arms outstretched as if frozen mid-flight. Pottery sat unbroken, meals remained uneaten. Some scientists whisper of a massive flood, others suspect climate collapse. A few speak in hushed tones of an ancient disaster we cannot yet understand. Stand here, amidst the quiet ruins, and you feel it, a stillness so deep, it presses on your chest. A ghost city, holding secrets it refuses to tell. 3. Petra, the rose-red city. Now, picture this. You're walking through a narrow canyon called the Sick. Towering cliffs rise on either side, their stone glowing deep orange beneath the desert sun. The air is dry, hot, silent, until, suddenly the path opens, and there before you stands Petra, a city carved entirely into rose-red cliffs by the ancient Nabateans. Its temples shimmered like jewels, its tombs soared like palaces. Water channels snaked through the rock, turning the desert into an oasis of life. Merchants from Rome, Egypt, India, and China all crossed paths here. But time is relentless. Trade routes shifted, empires rose and fell, earthquakes shattered Petra's foundations. One day, the merchants stopped coming, the fountains ran dry, and the city slipped quietly beneath the sands of memory. For nearly 1,000 years, Petra lay forgotten, until a Swiss explorer rediscovered it in 1812, following whispered Bedouin tales. Today, when the sun sets and shadows creep over the rose-colored facades, you can almost hear the echoes of voices long gone. Merchants bargaining, children laughing, priests chanting prayers carved into stone. 4. Heraclion, Egypt's sunken city. Not all lost cities lie beneath deserts. Some sleep beneath the waves. Just off Egypt's northern coast, under 30 feet of water, lies the drowned city of Heraclion. 2,000 years ago, Heraclion was one of the most important ports in the ancient world, a place where Greek traders met Egyptian priests, where colossal statues of gods guarded the harbor, and where golden treasures filled the temples. Then, sometime in the 2nd century BC, disaster struck. Earthquakes shook the land, the seabed gave way. In a single night, Heraclion sank beneath the Mediterranean Sea. For centuries, it was a myth, a name whispered in ancient texts, until 2001, when divers discovered massive stone columns, hieroglyph-covered slabs, and giant statues of pharaohs lying silently on the seafloor, perfectly preserved by time. Imagine swimming through those ruins now, light filtering down in silver beams, schools of fish darting between colossal statues, silent temples standing proud beneath the ocean. It feels otherworldly. 5. The mystery of Teotihuacan. Far across the world, in the Valley of Mexico, lies Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. Built nearly 2,000 years ago, it was one of the largest cities on Earth, home to more than 150,000. Its pyramid of the sun still towers high, aligned perfectly with the movements of the cosmos. Its grand avenue of the dead stretches endlessly, lined with temples and palaces. Here's the mystery. The people who built Teotihuacan are unknown. By the time the Aztecs arrived centuries later, the city was already abandoned, its palaces empty, its temples silent. The Aztecs, awestruck by its scale, believed gods, not humans, had built it. Even today, archaeologists find tunnels filled with mercury, strange carvings of unknown symbols, and artifacts hinting at forgotten rituals. Teotihuacan remains one of history's deepest enigmas, a city built by geniuses, whose names time refused to remember, a thread through time. Each of these cities, Uba, Mohenjo-Daro, Petra, Heraclion, Teotihuacan, tells the same silent truth: nothing lasts forever. Empires rise, markets flourish, streets fill with laughter, and then, one day, they are gone, buried beneath sand, swallowed by the sea, devoured by jungle vines. And yet, standing among their ruins, you don't feel despair, you feel awe, because these cities whisper to us still. They remind us of humanity's endless desire to create, to dream, to build something that outlives us. When you walk through Petra's canyons, or touch the stones of Mohenjo-Daro, you realize, we are part of something far greater than ourselves, and somewhere, even now, beneath shifting sands or deep oceans, there are still more cities waiting to be found. Close your eyes. Hear it, the roar of the North Atlantic. The waves crash against the wooden hull, salty spray stinging your face. The wind tears at your cloak, whipping your hair into knots. Above, grey clouds hang low, heavy with rain. And there, slicing through the icy mist, a longship surges forward, its dragon-headed prow cutting through the unknown. These are the Vikings, warriors, traders, explorers, men and women, who gazed at the endless horizon and thought, what lies beyond? 1. The call of the unknown. 1,000 years ago, Europe feared the sea beyond its coasts. Maps ended in blank spaces. Legends spoke of sea monsters, of ships swallowed by endless whirlpools, of an edge where the ocean simply fell away. But for the Norse people of Scandinavia, the sea was life. The fjords carved their lands, the tides carried their dreams, and the winds whispered possibilities. And so they built their longships, masterpieces of engineering. Sleek, narrow, carved from oak, these ships could glide across shallow rivers, or ride the fury of open oceans. One ship, 30 men, one destiny, to follow the sun where no one else dared. 2. Lindisfarne, a dawn of terror. In the summer of 793 AD, a monastery on the island of Lindisfarne woke to the sound of oars cutting water. The monks prayed, unaware that fate was about to change forever. The Vikings came without warning, swift, relentless. They stormed the sacred halls, seizing gold, silver, and slaves. Blood stained the sand, and the world trembled at the news. To Christian Europe, the Vikings became demons of the north, creatures of chaos and fire. But this was only the beginning. For every monastery burned, 1,000 horizons called. Because the Vikings weren't just raiders, they were explorers. 3. Iceland, a land forged by fire. By 870 AD, a bold group of Norsemen set their eyes westward. Weeks of sailing led them to a place unlike anything they had ever seen. Iceland. Steam rose from the earth, geysers erupted into the sky, black volcanic rock carved the land, and glaciers glittered beneath the sun. It was harsh, wild, untamed, and yet, they stayed. They built farms, raised families, and carved sagas into memory. Among them was a young boy named Erik Thorvaldsson, though history would remember him by another name, Erik the Red. 4. Greenland, the edge of the world. Erik the Red's temper was as legendary as his courage. Banished from Iceland, after a violent feud, he set sail further west, into uncharted waters. What he found was a vast frozen wilderness, Greenland. Its coasts were cold and desolate, but its fjords offered shelter, and its pastures promised survival. Against all odds, Eric founded a settlement there. Imagine it, wooden halls glowing with firelight, children laughing beneath endless winter skies, and beyond the icy cliffs, only the roaring ocean and the unknown. But even Greenland was not the end. Eric's son would carry the Viking dream further still. 5. Vinland, the first Europeans in America. His name was Leif Erikson. In the year 1000 AD, long before Columbus, Leif sailed westward from Greenland, guided by whispers of lands glimpsed by wandering sailors. After days of icy winds and endless waves, his ship reached a strange wild coast. Green forests stretched as far as the eye could see, rivers teemed with salmon, grapes grew wild in the sun. Leif called it Vinland, the land of wine. Archaeological evidence tells us today, the Vikings had reached North America, nearly 500 years before anyone else, but they did not stay. Conflicts with the native peoples, harsh winters, and dwindling resources forced them to leave. Vinland faded into legend, until its truth resurfaced centuries later. 6. Beyond the horizon, the Vikings' voyages reshaped the medieval world. They sailed the rivers of Russia, trading furs and silver, as far as Constantinople. They settled in Ireland and Scotland, blended into England's history, and even became bodyguards for the Byzantine emperors, the Varangian Guard. But beyond their raids and conquests, beyond the fear they inspired, there was something greater, a hunger for the unknown. They dared to imagine lands beyond the map's edge, and then they went there. 7. A legacy in the wind. Stand now at the edge of a northern cliff. The sea crashes far below. The wind whips around you, carrying the faint creak of phantom oars, and the ghostly cry of ravens overhead. Look out toward the horizon, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The songs of the Vikings, the laughter of sailors sharing mead beneath cold stars, the distant rumble of longships cutting through storm-tossed seas. The world they discovered, the paths they carved, the sagas they left behind, they live on in us, because every time we look toward the unknown, every time we dream of what lies beyond, we carry a piece of them with us.